him and pop him in as a panelist when he shows up.
Okay, so then we should start with the group reports.
Yeah. So we're gonna have to.
Why am I getting no sound? I'm getting no sound.
Yeah, we can hear you. So.
No, I'm not getting the sound.
I understand.
You're killing me with this.
There.
All right, so we're live now. So I don't know, either Mayo or Maria, if you want to get started.
Sure. So this is the first, not first, but the first time we're meeting as a whole group since we broken up into the smaller groups, into the group 1 and group 2. So we thought that it would be good since April's right around the corner and we have to begin thinking about the report. It would be good to hear for both groups to hear what the other group are working on and any recommendations that they might be ready to make so far. And I believe that for group 1, K, I might have it confused. If group 1 is K and group 2 is Jorge, or am I confused? Yes.
KK's muted.
I'm
There you
group 2.
Group 2. Okay, so then
Yeah, I'm group 1.
Okay, great. All right. So why don't we start with Jorge for group 1?
Sure. Give me 2 seconds. I gotta look at my notes. All right. So let's see. All right. So basically, let's see. Right. Okay. So where we stand right now is, in addition to just the meeting notes, the survey is basically almost done. Kathy, if she's here, can speak to that more. But basically, I think a lot of people have seen the emails and seen kind of the development. It seems to be ready to go, more or less, in the next couple of days. I know we've had contact with the houses of worship, and they're all, willing to go ahead and publicize that. There's a lot of, movement on that. I don't know if Kathy needs any more help with the survey as far as speaking to people in the Chamber of Commerce, but we're going to need to advertise with posters and whatnot. We talked about the survey at length the last meeting, but like I mentioned, we've had a lot of movement since then. The second half of the meeting last time was basically on policies and procedures. We talked about recruitment first of all. The chief mentioned, for example, that right now 20 of the 23 officers, there's about 22 of them that are male. They're currently looking to hire a Spanish speaker. And that moved us along to recruitment generally. And I think everyone kind of coalesced around the idea that we need to suggest to the county, who's also there's a working group in the county that's going to suggest this also to the state, that there needs to be more, a less restrictive hiring structure. We talked about that rule of 3 candidates and the different lists, and right now it's just generally very bureaucratic and it doesn't really serve the purpose of diversity, or it doesn't serve a lot of purposes. It just makes it very difficult. For example, the chief mentioned that perhaps the hiring age should be increased to 35. Which would there was a lot of good suggestions on that, and so I think the
age of 25, not 35.
25. I was gonna say 45, but all right. Thank you, chief. But yeah, so I think everyone kind of coalesced around that fact that that's one of the deliverables should be that we mention to the county and the state that there should be more flexibility in the hiring process. What else? And Larry mentioned along the same lines that this kind of falls in line with the commitment that the trustees had made as far as diversifying hiring practices, to the extent that state requirements for police meet those things. But yeah, what else? And then one thing that was brought up near the end was perhaps mental wellness check-ins. We had that conversation about mental wellness check-ins at the officer level, and whether there's procedures or not for that. I'm unclear whether there's an actual procedure to that, but the chief did talk a bit about how officers do kind of watch their back in terms of that. But I kind of put a pinpoint on that because I'm actually not sure if there's any type of procedural mental wellness check-in. And near the end, Mayo mentioned the ABLE, which the ABLE project, which is, I believe, related to some type of hiring at the county level, but honestly, I can't speak to it because I'm not sure. And I believe that's where we left off.
And I can just to fill in a little bit. First of all, thank you very much
welcome.
for the presentation. And I just want to go a little bit into, we discussed a bit about raising possibly, the chief suggested it might be beneficial to have candidates have a little more life experience before they become police officers and how that might be helpful. Not to suggest that younger people are incapable, but just as we raise the age for people's criminal responsibility, we should probably take that into account in terms of people's ability to most successfully serve as police officers. And we did also talk a bit about maybe raising the age, because right now the cutoff is 35, to permit older applicants to still be able to become police officers. So I think that was kind of where there was a little bit of give and take there. And that way we wouldn't be turning away a person who maybe a little later in life decided that they wanted to become a police officer. With respect to Project ABLE, it's the active bystandership for law enforcement. And we actually did receive confirmation that they're willing to give a presentation to our group on the 22nd, and it would be a separate standalone meeting. So we just got that confirmation a little while ago, so that's why you didn't have that to present. But they're willing to come and give a presentation, and I think it's going to be a dynamic presentation. And in terms of everything you've mentioned so far, I will also fill you in that the county had its vote yesterday on its full recommendations, and all of the recommendations passed. They didn't all pass unanimously, or in fact, nothing passed unanimously because one person abstained on all of the votes, but several passed without any opposition, and then the others passed with a significant majority. But ABLE was one that passed. I think there may have been one in opposition, close to 30 in favor, as well as the proposed changes to the civil service rules, which would permit what you were talking about in terms of the expanding the potential for the departments to hire and looking at giving the civil service exam more frequently as well. So as we move beyond that, I'll be able to share that report, and that may prove to be helpful to all of us as a guide, and it may trim some of what we're trying to do, and it may allow us to focus a bit more. So I'm not at liberty to share the specific recommendations at this point, but we can certainly work off of what we've been doing. And I think that that presentation was phenomenal. Is there anything else that you have to add?
Mayo?
Can
Me
I do a
personally,
quick
no.
comment? So
Yes, please. We're open to questions. Absolutely. Please go
yeah,
ahead.
so regarding the board's hiring policy and the desire for more diversity, as Jorge mentioned, I brought up the idea that that needs to somehow be incorporated into the manual. You know, and that's not an easy job necessarily, but subcommittee one, you know, there should be a couple of volunteers from that committee, and I'm happy to work with them. I know Janice Silverberg, one of our trustees, also, she mentioned that she'd be willing to work on that. So as a takeaway from this, anyone that wants to work on a little group drafting session, you know, send me a quick email and I'll arrange it, and we'll work on it. As you'll see when we get to the values and mission statement on the next group, the group editing session, the smaller group editing session, actually worked pretty well. It was pretty efficient. So anyway, whoever is interested, let me know.
Sorry, further to what Larry's talking about, I kind of think just generally all the things we've mentioned are really going to get hammered out in the editing of the procedure, the document, because we've talked a lot about, you know, transparency and all these other things, for example, but in the actual writing, you know, for example, you know, in the procedure, there'll be a mental wellness check-in for all officers once a month. I don't know what that is, but I think that's where all the work is really going to happen.
I think that it's important that we identify the areas that we think are most important, and then absolutely we'll pinpoint. And every recommendation that we'll come up with, our challenge will be to find a way to codify it so that it's something that becomes structural, hopefully both in the police manual, but possibly elsewhere as well. We may end up looking at legislative changes, whether it's locally, county, or state.
I also wanted to point out, just because I didn't want it to get lost, was that when group one looked at the actual manual, one change that was made that the group seemed to agree with was to change from the he or she, using he or she as pronouns, to the they, because I think that was probably significant.
Absolutely. And as we work through, we realize that the language is not necessarily current language. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. Sometimes the language has different meaning, or it'll be interpreted differently than it was intended. So if we have an opportunity to address that, I think that we certainly will. And again, I want to just go back to Larry and the village itself to commend you for being proactive. And before we even started this, for recognizing, how the village may want to move forward in terms of inclusion. Does anyone? Yes, please.
Okay, number one, earlier when we first started, you gave us, or Larry gave us links to the ABLE so we could get a handle on it. So those were very good if anybody wants to check back on those. And secondly, in regard to the survey, it was mentioned one time that we think about using the survey that already is in existence from Tarrytown. I think we might want to reconsider that because we are really falling behind. And this survey as it exists, the last time I saw it, was very long, and people don't like long surveys. The other thing is, if we do the same one as Tarrytown, we can share information with each other and get a check between communities to see if our data is showing us anything.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that's something we certainly can take into consideration. And I believe that we may need to schedule another meeting of the group that came together to work with respect to the survey. But ideally, we'll have a decision one way or another within a week, I would hope.
Nay, are we talking about adopting the Terrytown survey? I thought we were more looking at Ardsley's survey versus Terrytown.
And there were a number of different options that were available. I know that there's been some additional work that's been done offline since we last met. So I think that it probably makes sense to schedule another meeting, and maybe we can block out an hour. Ideally, we won't need the entire hour, but if we do, we have it, and we'll be able to look at the different proposals. And then ideally, we'll come up with one that everybody's comfortable with.
Although I was thinking that Kay maybe should go next and give an update for.
I think so.
But I think it would be helpful to hear from Kathy because a lot has gone on with the survey, just so that everybody's up to date with the current status of the survey that's been going around on the Google group. Is that okay?
I think that if we did all of the minutes before we started chatting, that it would be more time saving because it may be redundant. Anyway, okay. So we met first on December 29th, and we discussed the role of our committee, which is to review policy and procedures, community engagement, technology, accountability, and transparency. Subcommittee 1 will streamline the mission statement. All committee members can volunteer. This committee will review specific sections of the police manual and review suggestions that are already been made and are in Google Docs. The Irvington Police Policy Manual should be digitalized and made available to the public on the Irvington Police Department website. We had a discussion of 911 calls and the possible use of other numbers for fire, medical emergencies, etc. Currently, Irvington police officers are trained to respond to all types of calls, but not all of the officers are trained to respond to the emotionally disturbed person calls. There is always a police sergeant on duty to take calls, 911 calls. The committee agreed it would be beneficial for more training on how to handle mental health crisis situations, de-escalation training, and crisis intervention team training. The county may be restoring funding for a crisis intervention team. The Irvington Police Department states that time is of the essence and it takes time for the crisis team to arrive on the scene. Research, we're going to research available training from the Police Academy and other sources such as EDP workshops with live actors and Cahoots. Westchester County is looking at creating an app to help officers access protocols for specific situations. Discussion about police in schools. It was discussed whether there should be police interaction with the students and what kind of interaction. Unconscious bias training was discussed. Also, the posts on Black at Irvington, it was recommended that everybody take a look at those. Committee member Arlene Burgo said that she would help facilitate conversations between present and former Irvington students and the Irvington Police Department. The Irvington Police Department uses Facebook and Instagram mostly, Instagram. There was discussion about the community survey, who to include and how to reach them, what it should include, and also a survey for the police department employees was discussed, where they could say how they felt about the police department and how could we do that anonymously. Other items discussed were chokeholds, stop and frisk, equipment needed, costs associated with new equipment, shoot to stop threat versus shoot to kill, use of tasers and nets, a look at best practices of other police departments, and collaboration with other police departments. Our last meeting, we spent a lot of time discussing the survey, who should read, who should get it. Residents, schools, employers, employees, possibly using the Chamber of Commerce, visitors through houses of worship, and the data from each group would be kept separately. How would we reach residents? Through postcards, possibly using a scannable code. The survey would be in multiple languages, online, and paper surveys would be available. A lengthy discussion ensued about the type of questions and the wording of questions, and no decision was made. A small group was going to everybody was going to look at the survey and offer suggestions to Kathy as to how they thought, what topics they thought should be included and how it should be worded. And Maria requested that everybody provide feedback on the end of the survey by that Friday. Kathy will review the feedback and edit the survey. We discussed the mission statement, and people seem to be of the mind to keep it short and simple. And a small group, including Arlene, Frank, and John, were going to meet and work on the mission statement. Policies and procedures, we began with section 102-4, duties and responsibility. Under purpose, the group decided that there did not appear to be an actual need to have the wording Westchester County Personnel Department at the end of the sentence, and the group believes that should be removed. Under policies and all other areas of the document, it was suggested to change his or her, he, she, and similar text to their and they, etc., as needed. Under procedures, general duties, and after department, as established in collaboration with village officials and the broader community, should be inserted. Under specific duties, number 4, add the exception of vacation, and number 6, this doesn't make sense unless you're looking at it, but these were minor changes made to the wording. And it was agreed that we would all have a homework assignment so that we would come to the next meeting prepared. And at the next meeting, we're going to discuss discipline and SCVM training standards. Okay. That's it for the minutes, but I have something that I would like to say in light of the things that happened last week. This very important to me. So in September, there was a parade, convoy, caravan, whatever you want to call it, of Trump supporters in Irvington. Apparently, a permit was not required for this event. I was not on Main Street at the time, but I had seen pictures of Irvington police cars with lights on, leading and following the parade or convoy or whatever it was called. Those pictures indicated to me and to other residents that the police were participants in this rally. Many people in town at the time said that the drivers of the vehicles were rowdy and rude to pedestrians. Again, I was not there, but I have seen these same vehicles at another rally with their rear license plates obscured. They are not being stopped and ticketed. This is going on throughout the county and the rest of our country. I'm not just referring to Irvington PD. I took pictures and sent them to Greenburgh PD, where I saw them and nothing was done. We have been talking about fair, equal, and impartial treatment, and most of this has been in regard to people of color. Today, I asked the Irvington Police Department to think about whether or not they have treated the Trump supporters equally, or if they have ignored violations. Have they been driving through Irvington with their rear plates obscured? Are those flags obstructing their vision or the vision of other drivers? Have they obstructed traffic? They certainly obstructed traffic on the Tappan Zee Bridge when they shut it down. Every police department in the country that has allowed them to get away with even minor traffic violations contributed to what happened at the Capitol last week. And I ask Irvington Police Department to think about this very carefully. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your report. What I would like to do is, I think we'll have time to discuss this further, but this is really what I would like for us to do is focus on the work of each of the working groups right now. I think that that's really what we're here for at this stage. And it's important that you raise your concerns because it goes toward what your perception, or maybe not even yours, you weren't there, but what someone else's perception may be. And that we give, that perhaps, the department through the chief or one of the other officers that are part of our task force an opportunity to discuss it. And maybe you're making them aware of something that they may not have necessarily been aware of or through a different perspective. I do think that what we need to do right now is focus on the first two reports.
Yes.
So what I want to do is go back to Jorge's report because we didn't really have an opportunity.
Mayo, before we move on, I'm not going to respond to the second comment, but the first one,
Okay.
when Kay gave her report, we do not, I want to make this very clear and precise. We do not shoot to kill. We are not trained to shoot to kill.
Yes, I didn't
we are
say,
trained-
I just said it was discussed. I didn't say that. I said that we discussed the item of shoot to stop threat versus shoot to kill.
And I think-
It was discussion.
There's no shoot to kill with us. It's shoot center mass, and
Okay,
that's it. There's no shoot to kill. I mean, you make it sound like we're out there. It sounds, I'm not saying you, but the interpretation comes that we're being trained to kill.
And
that's
Chief,
what
I think that what
we
I
discussed
would
it,
like
that's
for us
all.
to
We
do- hey,
discussed
please,
it.
I understand it
please,
was
what I would
discussed,
like to do,
but
may I
the-
make a suggestion, please? My suggestion is that I
Need to
don't think
stop.
anybody's suggesting that the Irvington police
Little-
shoots to kill. It's something that was being considered by the group. And now the group will be able to ask questions of the department, and Chief, you will be able to clarify what the policy is and how it's implemented by the department. So I don't want anyone to think that we're going to discuss a number of things, some of which may apply to departments, some of which may not. But it's just a conversation about where we are, and to the degree that something needs to be codified, how can we do that? It's not stated, and I don't think that Kay said that she was stating it in that way. But I don't want anyone to take it as if we are suggesting that the Irvington police does something. Now, if there's a
No,
specific question,
it's just how it's worded and stated, shoot to kill. It has nothing to do with our procedures. And I just want to clarify that point. I mean, it's a very hard term to deal with when you say shoot to kill, and it gives the misinterpretation of that's what it's all about, and it's not.
well, that's
Okay,
one of the
but you're
reasons that
missing
we're
the
going
point
to ask to
that
have
all I'm
Lieutenant
missing the
Alagi
point.
come as.
I am just
We can't have
reporting
multiple-
what was
We
discussed.
can't have
This-
multiple conversations, please. I mean, right now, at this point, in fairness to everybody else who has agreed to participate in this
All right.
process, we can't exclude them while we have two people go back and forth. So I think what we need to do right now is address the business of today, which is going back to the reports. But since we've gone down this path a little bit, I think that there'll be plenty of opportunity to discuss what it actually is. I think that when Lieutenant Alaji comes and if he's able to come and give a presentation, then we'll be able to get more information in terms of what the actual training is and why that training is what it is. And that will hopefully be eye-opening to both sides. And it really shouldn't, hopefully there's not going to be sides, but it will be informational for everyone. And we'll have an idea of what the training is, why it is what it is, and whether it should remain as it is. Maybe we have suggestions in terms of how we may want to change it. But in the meantime, I would suggest that we give everybody at least an opportunity to ask Jorge questions about his report. And we might be able to go back and add a little more detail if it's necessary. And then we'll be able to do the same for Kay's report before we have our guest speaker come.
I'll go with that.
So that being said, does anybody have any questions for Jorge? Because the group spent a good amount of time talking about what we're doing. And with respect to Kay's report, we kind of went through it, but it dealt with it. We didn't get really into the specifics of the policies themselves. So, we didn't get into what we really were talking about when we were making some of these changes or why we made the changes. So, for instance, well, let's go into Jorge's first, if you don't mind. Does anybody have any questions for his report, for him, based upon his report or the working group's work? Okay, I don't see any questions. So that's fine. With respect to Kay's report, does anyone have any questions?
I just would like to repeat what I said. So to make it clear, I simply said that other items discussed were chokehold, stop and frisk, equipment needed, use of tasers, nets, look at best practices, shoot to stop threat versus shoot to kill. Not that the Irvington Police Department did any of those things. These were just items that we discussed.
And I agree with you. I was present for the meeting, and no one was making the suggestion that the Irvington Police Department does these things. So we were just looking at what would best practices look like.
All of those things.
And
No police departments. No
Yes,
police
exactly.
departments shoot to kill. 0.0.
And that's my point. The term
Nobody.
does not fit here at all for anybody, any police officer, state, federal, local. We do not shoot to kill. That's a bad term. Thank you.
0.0. Police departments in the United States are trained to shoot to kill. We're all trained.
I'm
to
only
stop.
reporting what we discussed.
right.
So it's only what we discussed, not that you're doing it. So only this is what we discussed at our meeting. That's
Okay,
it.
I understand that. And
All
having
right.
said that, nobody's doing that. 0.0.
Well, Howie, what I would suggest, again, we're going to hopefully have a presentation from the person who's responsible for the training in the academy. My understanding is that police are generally taught to shoot center mass.
Correct.
And if you're taught to
Instead of
shoot
mass,
center
one to
mass,
the head.
and it may result in somebody dying, but it's important that we talk about, and it's informationally, it's important for everybody to understand why that is how they're trained. And
That's
then
fair.
we can talk about whether we think there are some alternatives. The other thing is I want to just go a little bit into some of the alternatives and why we were discussing them. So there was a conversation about non-lethal use of force. And we talked a bit about the taser and what the taser policy might be. And we talked about using nets, but using nets, just so that people have an idea of what that could be. There are net guns, and the net guns are deployed from devices that look like guns, except they're not. And they shoot out a net, and that net can immobilize somebody. And the potential benefit of the net gun over a taser is that a taser requires a tremendous amount of precision so that you have both prongs entering a person's body within a certain distance of one another. And if it doesn't work exactly as intended, the taser doesn't work, and it doesn't stop that person from proceeding against the officer, which can lead to either injury of the individual, injury of the officer, or injury of somebody that's in the public. So this net gun is something that may be, and we need to look at it and study it, may be an alternative that allows for the department to have an additional use of non-lethal force that has a lesser chance of harming someone. And of course, I can imagine somebody's going to get hit with the net gun, fall, hit their head and pass away. So that, that eventually something's going to happen. However, is it much less likely than having someone die from a taser? Is it more likely that the officer will be safe because it works and it's going to work closer in a greater percentage of the time? So those are some of the things that we were talking about. And in terms of changing the terminology from she or he to they, it was with recognition that that there are people in the community who don't view themselves as being of a particular gender. So that way, it would take everyone into account, well, without giving anyone the feeling that they're not being recognized for who they are. So that was why that was there. So without context, you might not necessarily understand what it was that we were discussing as far as that component of what we discussed. But again, we're just getting started. These are things that people had questions about. And I just think that in fairness, we have to recognize that the vast majority of us are not law enforcement officials, don't have a background in criminal justice. Even many of the attorneys who are here didn't and don't practice criminal justice. And that we are not specifically addressing the Irvington Police Department for any concerns we might particularly have unless otherwise stated. So there may be times where we say, hey, we think that the Irvington Police Department engages in a particular course of conduct or has a policy we think should be changed. And then we can discuss it and we'll look at it. We'll be able to look at the pros and cons of the policy and be able to address it. I don't think anyone has come from the groups I've seen, at least, nobody's come from a position where they felt that something was automatically good or bad. So there's been an openness, and in particular, there's been an openness on the part of the police. So they've been, from what I can see, very receptive and open to looking at even exploring the net gun. I think that, I think that we're going to have an opportunity to have a lot of success, but we just have to make sure we don't personalize anything, because I don't believe that that's what's in anyone's heart, as from what I've observed.
Mayo, I just had, I guess, two clarifications. One is that training, I believe training is under the purview of Group 1. And thank you, Lieutenant Pignatelli, for reaching out to Lieutenant Alongi. And I don't think what I got from your email was that he's not going to be able to make a presentation, but what he has made, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but what he's making available is a video, an 1.5-hour video going over what happens at the training academy, because I guess all of the localities must be reaching out to him for a similar purpose. So I think we should make that video available to everyone, but especially Group 1, since that falls within their purview. And then the other thing is that this is what I heard agreement on, but again, if other people heard differently, but I thought I heard agreement on the issue of police having more contact with children. What I mean by that is I thought we all agreed, whether it's in the school or not in the school, but everybody seemed to think that non-criminal interaction between what I heard was that non-criminal interaction between the police and young people could be a positive.
I think my sense is that we did not have a consensus about that.
Okay.
And that's something that is up in the air.
It was under discussion.
Yeah.
So there were different feelings about it, so nothing was resolved.
Okay. We want to go now to the survey?
Are there any additional questions that anybody has regarding either? Thank you. Jorge, please.
Yeah, I have a question just generally. Were there any strong recommendations, Kay, that you saw from your group where you guys came together under the mental health stuff or the de-escalation work and the training that's related to that? Is there anything you guys came together on?
Not regarding the mental health of the police officers, no. We didn't discuss that. We discussed training about dealing with the emotionally disturbed person, but we didn't discuss anything regarding the mental health of officers.
No, I actually mean that. The mental health work, working with professionals that would assist the police, not the police's mental health, but did you guys come together on that at all?
We discussed additional training resources that we would look into, and also the idea of Westchester, again, renewing the crisis intervention team. But I think the majority of police officers felt that it took them too long to respond. But we did talk about looking into other training resources, and that the group felt that all Irvington police officers should be trained in dealing with emotionally disturbed people.
And Jorge, my recollection was that we discussed the possibility of shared services, which would allow the village to partner with neighboring communities and with Westchester County, where we could possibly, and I forget, and I'm sorry about that, but one of our officers is a member of the SWAT team. I can't remember who it was, so please, but they were discussing the benefits of working with other municipalities and how people brought different talents, and that it enhanced the whole, and that we'd be able to look at a shared service model like that, where we'd be able to have officers from different municipalities along with mental health professionals working with those officers as a team. So we'd be able to have a hub of crisis intervention teams throughout the county with perhaps 6 or so intervention teams, so that the county would be able to be covered 24 hours a day. And you wouldn't have to wait for someone to arrive from White Plains or from someplace else in the county, and that they would be on call, much as we have with our volunteer firefighters or volunteer ambulance, where you know that you have coverage.
So that was in terms of more than just SWAT. I didn't realize that. I was there for that conversation, but I didn't realize it was in more than just in terms of SWAT.
We were using SWAT as an
Mayo,
example at that time.
I think Mark will be able to give a better presentation on where we are
Yeah.
now with response to that. I mean, we've worked with him currently with what's going on during COVID. There was a thought process, as I recall, of possibly putting in a social service person or psychiatrist or psychologist within a tactical response team that would be responding to a mental health issue. That still needs to be worked on, and I think that was also discussed with Mark Giuliano too, with regard to that. So I think once we hear from him, I think he could elaborate a lot deeper as to where we're going and where we want to do. We are doing a lot more de-escalation training. It is now part of the academy training. I think they're getting about 40 hours, which is approximately about a week of de-escalation training and dealing with the mental health issues of and responding to those type of calls. So yeah, we are trained. We continue to train, and yes, it is looking for a shared services role with regard to the tactical teams also.
And when we say shared services, there are a number of benefits there. Number one, you bring best practices from different departments so
Right.
that you can share that, and we end up probably with something better than any one department by itself. The other thing is that it saves money. So, when you have multiple villages and towns coming together, it strengthens community, it strengthens relationships between the departments and hopefully amongst the members of the various communities that they serve. And it allows us to do a lot more than we'd be able to do by ourselves. And just going back, I mean, we have to keep in mind where we are and what our resources are, and that we're a small department. So as such, to the degree we're able to partner with other departments allows us to do a lot more, and we get a ton more for less, and without burdening any particular group of officers. So we also, in my estimation, want to make sure that they're not asked to do too much at any given time, because then it's a little difficult to expect them to be able to do it all. Number one, everybody's not going to be a master of each discipline. And this will allow us to make sure that we get the training on an ongoing basis. So as you listen, when Mr. Giuliano comes, he's phenomenal. He's one of the best at what he does in the world, in my estimation. And he trains with some experts throughout the world. He's going to really, I think you'll find his presentation to be tremendous. And please, it's an opportunity for us to think outside the box and reimagine again. So please ask him questions. And I think that he'll be able to give us a lot of insight, put it that way. And we're trying to get back.
I was just going to say, I think that it's more important, Mayo, to have the shared services in terms of for training, even more than for your response teams, because those kinds of incidences take so little time to happen that you really don't have time to get other people there. So the more training that your staffs have, and especially if it's on a border between two communities that they've had the same training, I think that's a fantastic idea that has to really be looked into.
And-
But the idea of a crisis team, I don't care if they're on duty 24/7. What happens if the crisis team is called to, if there's multiple incidences in 3 different communities, you're not going to have it. We've had it with the fly car, with the ambulance corps, them not being able to come because they're on 3 other locations.
The crisis teams, as we envision them, will be able to cover, again, 6 geographical locations, and that's what the county has been discussing. And ideally, based upon the stats that we've had so far, which of course, to your point, are subject to change any given day. But for the most part, we would expect that we should be able to cover everything within a pretty quick period of time. And we look at it as we would if you have an EMT that arrives and helps you. The goal would be to help you, stabilize you, and if you needed surgery, get you to the person who can do that surgery. So here, and I forget who mentioned it, and you may have, John, if we provide the training, you did, if we provide the training to all of the officers, not just specialized officers who are members of a crisis intervention team, but to all of the officers, then they have that basic baseline training where they can stabilize a situation until maybe somebody with more expertise and mental health professionals get there. So especially if we're looking at, let's say, a barricaded situation or a hostage situation where we don't have to necessarily go in, then it gives us an opportunity for Mark to get a team there along with our trained officers and maybe some trained officers from adjoining communities who can kind of de-escalate. And we see it every day. I mean, you see it all the time where it works very well. The issue is that when it doesn't work well, it's a disaster. And it's a disaster either for the members of the community, or you look at Officer Frey, he doesn't get out of the car. Before he can step out of the car, he's shot. So those are the things we want to be able to avoid and make sure that we give everybody the best chance at a good result. The best results are one I remember in Eastchester recently, where they were able to talk the guy down. It didn't even become criminal. The police were there, but they engaged with him along with the mental health officer, agent. I believe they may not have even had a mental health professional. I don't recall. But anyway, they were able to calm the person down, walk him out, and he went to a hospital. He didn't end up going to court. It wasn't really a criminal situation. It was a person in mental distress. In theory, could you have charged him? Yes, but I thought they did the right thing, and it worked out beautifully. And I think the people in the community were happy that it was dealt with that way. So those are the things we want to do. We want to be able to give the department the tools to have that kind of interaction. We want to highlight that so that the community knows that it exists. And then, that removes one more barrier between law enforcement and the community.
You also
Just to add,
between the police and the ambulance, police and the fire departments, those interagency relations really need to be on their top form for those situations.
yeah, absolutely. Just to add to that, and as Mark will elaborate too, as a result of COVID, the response team has gone virtual now, which has been a real asset to us. So if we do have a mental ill case that's ongoing, we are able to call and basically get a psychologist, a psychiatrist, or somebody from mental health to be right on the call with us at that point in time, which is a growing asset. We never had this before, and this saves time, this saves effort, and it's very quick to get who you need to work with in order to bring the situation under control.
That's
But like I
great.
said, I'll leave that for Mark to elaborate, because we're still doing that today. And we're hoping that this system will be definitely explored further to get a better response and a much more easier response to it.
Beautiful. Thank you very much, Chief.
I just
And I
want to say
want to
one
just
thing.
bring,
Sorry. I just want to say one thing. Chief, I was going to mention that because you seem to be very favorable with that. And just one question, is that limited right now to mental health issues?
Technically, yes. Other issues, put it this way, it's a work in progress. And yes, definitely, it can be explored to be utilized in other disciplines within the police department and even fire and EMS to somewhat come together if need be in an emergency response. But yes, it is a valuable tool.
Jorge, did you have anything in particular that you were considering?
No, not at all. It's just as soon as
I think you're muted.
sorry,
Thank you.
as soon as I heard the discussion between the whether we have this county team or we rely just on the police, I remember the chief speaking very favorably about this. And yeah, and I just wanted to also reiterate, I think what you were just mentioning as far as highlighting these things to the community is something that we need to just generally remember.
And that goes toward our transparency. And again, not the suggestion that we're intentionally hiding things, but it's important that we make people aware of what we do, especially when you look at services, no matter what the services are, that people are aware that it exists. Let's see, did someone else have a comment?
I just wanted to touch on the training for 1 second also. I did send a link in the chat and via email for the Police Academy training video that they created in response to everybody's request. It's about 1 hour and 15 minutes, and it covers all the recruit training as well as some in-service and supervisor training that they hold at the academy. So currently, recruits do go through crisis intervention training, which I think is the 40-hour training. But anybody that went through rookie school earlier on never had that. Now, everybody's trained to deal with mental health situations. And we have certified some officers that went to rookie school a while ago in crisis intervention. But I think, as far as Irvington's concerned, maybe we look at raising the minimum standard of that training to the crisis intervention training, where it's the week-long training to make sure everybody has that training instead of just, the newer people. And then beyond that is having some yearly refresher to a point, because I took that training years ago. And as I remember some of it, I don't remember all of it. And there's probably things that change, and it's a little bit perishable when you're not thinking about it constantly. And maybe having some type of, not a whole week, but maybe an 8-hour refresher or a 4-hour refresher every year for officers to get, up to date on that stuff.
Frank, I think that's a great idea. And that was what I meant to go to your posting the link. So please, everybody take advantage of that. That will give you basically everything that we were going to ask Lieutenant Longi to discuss. And I was really hoping we'd be able to have him give a presentation. I think he's phenomenal. And I think he's just I think he really is interested in the department being the best it can be and the academy being the best it can be. So I was hoping that he would be able to speak to you directly and answer any questions you may have. And, we'll see what happens. Maybe down the road, we'll have some opportunity to do that. Or maybe what we can do is partner with some other communities and maybe if we get some other groups to come together. I know it's difficult for us to ask him to say, okay, this week you're giving a presentation to this one of our 42 additional police departments. That would be his only job, would be giving presentations. But I think he's outstanding, and his commitment and his vision is tremendous, and he's really been wonderful. And Frank, I think that your suggestion is a great suggestion. I think we always want to go above and beyond whatever the minimum is. I mean, we want to be the best at whatever it is we're going to be doing. If we're going to engage in it, that kind of commitment is tremendous. So I think also that there's potential. I'm going to go to a comment. Kathy had said that there's state funding available for shared services. And I'm not 100%, I don't have that knowledge myself, but if there is, then I think that that's something that we ought to be pursuing. And that might not even necessarily always require the county. It may be something where we say, hey, we want to share services with the river towns. And maybe it's something that allows us to partner with our other agencies, our neighboring departments, to do things we're not able to do right now. And then the other question she had was, do all police departments have the same training in the county? So the answer will be yes, in the academy. So the Westchester County Department of Public Safety administers the academy, and they're responsible for all of the training in the academy. But once you come out of the academy, and for some transfers, you don't have to go through the county. And I think that there may even be, Chief, please correct me if I'm wrong, an opt-out. So if you decided you wanted to do the equivalent training elsewhere, are you able to do that?
No, for rookies coming on the job, yeah, they need to go through the police academy. That's set forth by the Police Municipal Training Council. In order to get that certificate, they can't become a cop unless they have that. And then that gets forwarded up to DCJS for their records and their role of law enforcement officers. But
How about, let's say for your transfers though, somebody who comes in from NYPD or from another department. Now, at that point, they don't have to go back through the academy.
no, that's what I think we had this discussion once before. We do, I think most departments do like a 30-day orientation of, you're already a police officer. There's no need to start from step one again. But you bring them in and you give them like a 30-day to learn basically how you operate here, the streets, the roads, how to use some of the equipment, the desk area, the radios and all of that. But it's basically an orientation to the village for those first 30 days. And when they come out of rookie school, that's a whole different story. It's a continued process, as I think Officer Nairati had explained prior to on the call.
I thought so. And John, so you're responsible for determining what additional training they're going to have when they come to this department, and then you make an assessment about when you think they're ready to when they're familiar enough with your protocols and with the community to go out on the street, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct.
Okay. And so that's something, and if there's something, not that I don't want to put you on the spot right now, but if there are things you think that we can explore to make your job easier when it comes to that as well, then these are things we can look at, so if there are any tools that might be beneficial.
Well, like I've always said, the key to it is training, and again, more training. So it's the redundancy of the training. You just can't show somebody to do something once. You have to do it periodically just to reinforce it. As Frank had also said too, with the training we got from de-escalation. Yeah, it doesn't stick with you. You try to remember the 5 points and the best practices. That's what you want to do. But we try to do annual training here with regard to some of that. We don't schedule a lot of heavy duty training with regard to what we should be doing besides firearms. We do taser training, and we do some mental health training, what to do, some role playing, what to do with somebody that is in a mental crisis, so to speak.
So
Thank you
I
very
have a
much.
question. If a police officer wants to do additional training, either with EDP or equipment used, does that police officer request the time to do that? How does that work?
Well, it depends on when it's offered. Usually all the training that we do need to be certified in goes through the Westchester County Police Academy. So they give us a list of courses that are going to be held throughout the year. And obviously I can't send everybody at once, but
Right.
I send personnel that are in need of it, or I've even requested that, hey, I'd like to go to this school. And if the opportunity exists that I could provide them with that training, I definitely will.
And I think Kathy had a question.
Yeah, thanks. I actually just wanted to make a comment about the Westchester County Shared Services Plan. So just so people know, because it's a good resource for us and other initiatives as well, is that the state offers many millions of dollars in funding through the counties for shared services initiatives, try to reduce taxes basically and consolidate some of our very expensive services around the state. And the county, so the county undertakes, sets up a bunch of opportunities every other year for groups to propose different initiatives. And I did actually pitch about a year ago, both crisis intervention training for the county, as well as a policing and public safety data warehouse for the county, where we could have integrated data on all the 43 police departments around the county. And I'm just going to post, so it's a good thing to be thinking about, especially when you're talking about services that can be delivered more efficiently in a consolidated way, to always be thinking that that might be a way to pitch it and get some funding for it, because these integration of these things does cost money. So I'm going to put the link to the last report. They did adopt the data warehouse proposal. The county did. They did not adopt the crisis intervention training piece. And you can just read the reports and kind of get a sense of the process and how it works. But it's always.
Kathy, when was that presentation?
Oh.
A while ago, more than a year.
Well, it was a lifetime ago. I think it was about a year and a half ago. It was before COVID. I remember not having a mask. I think it was about a year and a half ago that they were collecting proposals. So maybe it was even 2018. So I don't know what exactly the cycle is, but we can check with the county executive's office and find out.
I posted a link in the chat box for the shared services portion of the website for the county. So everyone can share that. If you'd like to take that, please do. And then, I mentioned that because recently, again, the county voted in favor of exactly what we're talking about. So chances are that the more we have buy-in from other municipalities, the likelihood is that at least it'll be significantly considered. So that's important. And
question regarding the shared services, just, and I'll take a look at that link. Thank you for sending it.
Sure.
Is the shared services limited to things like training, or, I mean, we're not talking about, I call 911 and somebody from Elmsford is going to show up at my door.
No. I mean, it would be areas where we can enhance what we're already doing with the local being primarily responsible, but shared services goes to a whole bunch of other things. I mean, I'm looking at it now, graphic design, information technology. There are a host of things that we have, selling surplus government property, a lot of different things that they're looking at, taxi and limousine service. And those are the things that exist right now. We may propose other things. So there are a lot of.
Can I add to this?
Sure.
We're currently working on a record management system for the county and through the county. Most of the jobs, or the smaller jobs, are dealing with a company that's basically gone under and is basically obsolete. So we've been working on this since 2018 with a shared service proposal through the county to get an upgraded records management system where they would be the sponsor and we would pay into the system too at the same time. It would be cheaper for us in the long run than possibly trying to do this out on our own, because it'd be way too costly to do on your own. So we always looked into shared services whenever we can.
That's usually what they're looking for from the state. Like the village contracts with, uses the same contract as Ardsley Dobbs and,
Correct.
and Terry
That kind of scenario, yes.
Blacktop and all of that stuff.
Any other questions or thoughts regarding that? So one of the things that had been discussed was the possibility of even, and I don't remember which group it was, but we talked about the possibility of allowing people to put their loved ones' information in a database that would allow the police to know that a person has a particular disability, mental illness, whatever it may be. It could be something as simple as letting them know that you have a deaf person in your home, and that if the police are giving a command, they won't hear. So it's not that they're ignoring. So those types of things where you could enter that into a database, and that could possibly also be part of a shared services database. So you may want to say, okay, this person may interact with Terrytown all the way down to Dobbs Ferry. So it's important for those departments to be aware that, this person's,
We're
has
already
whatever.
doing that. We've worked it out with the school. We have autistic children that we get a list from the schools. Any kids that need any type of physical or medical help that we need to be aware of. Con Ed has their own listing also. Our senior citizens, George Chino is great. He has a list of anybody who may need certain aspects for regard to a medical response in time of crisis, especially in time of crisis. So, well, to do it, I would say countywide would be an asset too, because people do travel.
Absolutely. Okay, so it looks like I think Mark is running a little bit late. So maybe we should move on to the next area of the agenda. Do you have that at your fingertips? Because as I was looking for documents, now I have to find it again. Maria, if possible, can you bring us to our next part of the agenda?
Because I thought it was an update on the survey, but
Okay. Do we want to schedule a time then while we're waiting for the next meeting regarding the survey?
Not really sure we need another meeting regarding
No?
the survey. Well, I guess that's a question and we can discuss the question is, we did make a decision to integrate elements of a couple different surveys together. And now, to those who think that the survey is really long, it is because it's not finalized. So we're now in the process of deciding what to delete. And it would maybe the best way to, and so I did give everyone the opportunity in the last few days to weigh in on questions that they thought were absolutely essential and which ones were less essential. And I have that information, and I tabulated it and I sent it out to everybody about a half hour before this meeting started. So the next step is going to be, there are many, many things to be done, but in terms of finalizing the actual questionnaire, the next decision is just to what to keep and what to toss. We're going to have to eliminate quite a lot. It will be a short survey in the end. So if anybody do people think it makes sense to do that through like a subcommittee and just have like a one subcommittee session and go through and say yes, no, and call it a day? Or does everybody want to weigh in on the final decision?
You might be better through a subcommittee. It'll move quicker.
Yeah, it is excruciating at this point, I have to say. So I'll tell you what, why don't you guys, one issue I have just procedurally, logistically, is that Mayo, we don't have, or I guess I should direct this to Larry, we don't have any way to, we don't have an email list for the committee. So we have to only send things to the whole group. And if people don't mind getting that, I'm happy to just do it that way. So I guess I'll send a note to the whole group and say who wants to join this final ecstatic session. And does that sound good to everybody?
I think it would be helpful if we had email groups for each committee. I'm sure everybody's getting tons of email and it's very hard to sort through. So I think that also if you had an email group for that committee, and then you could contact that committee just for those specific questions. And then when everything is done, send it out to everyone.
Unfortunately, I think the survey has been kind of under the jurisdiction of both, right? Of both committees. So, and I apologize for all the information. I know it's a nightmare.
It's not just email, it's email from everybody that, it's a lot of email.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'll tell you what, I'll send out an email, and anybody who wants to be in that final session, contact me. And the other thing, just so people know, is that we have moved forward with Chris Harrison at the schools, and they're going to facilitate our surveying of the students. And and Jorge did a great job of contacting all the houses of worship. And we do need somebody to volunteer to be the contact person for the Rivertown's Chamber of Commerce to distribute the survey to employers and employees. The next steps will be printing a postcard to distribute, which we can do as sort of on a sidetrack, but I have gotten price quotes for that. And so as soon as we have the final artwork, we'll have, we can push that out, and it should take about a week and a half to have that just printed and distributed through the Irvington Post Office to all of the households in 10503 and 10533. What else? I think that's kind of it. It's a huge amount of work, and I know it's a horrible process to create your own survey, but I think there are some real advantages to doing it. Doing it well is a big deal. But it's, I think that we'll have a survey that'll answer the questions that are specific to our committee. Any questions for me?
I wanted to thank you, Kathy. And I this is a question, or really maybe just confirmation. I'm not 100% sure. But based on Kay's report, I just wanted to clarify, or I guess ask, the information about the survey will be on the postcard. That the decision was made not to distribute the actual survey to all of the households, but rather to have the Q code or the link so that people could do that. And then in addition, if I remember correctly, there also would be language on the postcard that will say that if you would like a long form survey in English or Spanish, I wasn't sure if it was going to be for every language, that they should contact whoever and it would be made available to them. So could you confirm or clarify?
Yeah, that's right. So we'll have postcards printed that'll go out to every household, and also posters, and both of them will say in English and Spanish in a very small box, how to access the survey. And then we're going to have a translation into Spanish. So when you go to the online survey, or a paper survey, we will have a Spanish translation. And you also it will also explain to you how to request a paper copy, if that makes sense.
Do we have any idea whether there are other families in the community that don't speak either English or Spanish?
I don't know personally. I'm sure there is, more than one person who doesn't speak one of those two languages. So we can look at the US Census and see how many people had limited language ability in the last census. But I think it would be hard in the context of this survey to accommodate more than we are.
No.
It's tough, and just translating it to Spanish is going to be a pretty big job for somebody.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. One of the things that I'm just putting this out, and of course, we're not prepared to do it at this stage, but one of the things that the county looked at is making sure that we make everything available universally in terms of language. So we will have things accessible in virtually every language. So if you speak Mandarin, it'll be available in Mandarin. If you speak a different dialect, of whatever it may be. And I can try to I'll talk to them about what resources we're using to do that. And again, but that could be possibly another thing we could look at in terms of shared services. So if we had all of the municipalities in Westchester County going to a translation service saying, hey, we'd like for you to do this, it's worth it for them to do it for a lot less than if we're just saying, hey, come in and do it just for us. So we might be able to do that as well as something to consider.
Yeah, I suppose, the only thing I can think of that we'd be able to do in the time frame we're dealing with, which is very short, is maybe ask people to reach out to us. The problem is, how do you reach out to people who don't
Right.
read English and Spanish? So ask people to reach out if they need a different language, and then we can try to facilitate, that would require literally a translator. So
Sometimes there's a service, and the service is able to do it. So once they do it for us, then it's online. There's a drop down in the website, and it tells you to choose your language. So it's a question for them. It's probably, we're gonna think it's a lot, but it's probably not much for them to do it at all. They probably have software that scans it, and then it goes up. I did have one other question. Where are we in terms of our outreach to the school, in terms of getting some, at least a member or two, or if not more, to join us as our body, but also at a minimum to have them as a liaison? Because I think we were talking about, unless I missed it, we were talking about them assisting us in terms of the survey being administered in the school, but also to try and get their opinion about what the needs might be relating to police in the school, and what the perception of the teachers and or the students may be.
So in terms of the survey, which is the only part I can speak to, we're going to be surveying, the school has agreed to send out the survey link to all school employees, school district employees, as well as to all the students in the high school.
Beautiful.
And they did ask to review the survey first, which makes a lot of sense. So, but in terms of anything else, that I've not been a part of that personally.
I think it may have been Brian, Larry, and maybe John. I think we were talking about trying to reach out to the school district. I thought there had been a letter sent out. I just don't know if we had a response yet.
Yeah, I can give you an update on that. So the superintendent, including the superintendent himself, there's, I think, 4 or 5 names that were given to us of people who are interested. One of them was the gentleman who just left, John, who I think Mayo, you sent him a message thanking him for attending.
Yeah.
They happen to have, so today really was the first meeting they could attend. They haven't been assigned to subcommittees just yet. I'm going to work on doing that. But the problem is they had an internal meeting today from, basically 2 to 4, 2 to 3. So they were unable to attend, and they all apologize, and they all want to know what the future meeting dates are. So I'm going to give them all that information so they can participate in the future.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Can I ask a question, please?
Please.
Mine is, so we're gonna send the survey out to the student body up at the high school and to the staff up at the high school, but we're not gonna ask Dow's Lane or Main Street School, their staff to contribute to the survey?
That's a good idea. I didn't do it just because I didn't think of it. So I can certainly ask the district if they'll also distribute it to staff of all the schools.
Well, I mean, the school is a business. We talk about the other businesses in town and their employees being part of our sample. I would think that should include, they should be included in that sample.
Definitely. Thanks for the reminder. I'll write to Chris about that.
Can I ask one more question about the survey also?
Sure.
The template that I looked through that was rolled out by DCJS, right? There was an optional section where it allowed people to give their names. We have removed that section. Is that correct?
I'm not familiar with, so the survey that I did send around was from the COPS office, the Department of Justice COPS office. And I don't believe that there was any opportunity to identify yourself by name on that survey, but I might be wrong. Ours definitely is anonymous.
The Ardsley survey allowed you the optional section of providing your name and contact information. When you talk about data collection, I mean, we're allowing these people to elaborate on their responses, right? Some people may wanna, even though it can be confidential, it can still also be optional where people can put their contact information in if we ever wanted to follow up for any further clarification. The validation part of a data collection survey is usually an essential part. I don't know why that's being omitted from ours.
Actually, well, I think that it would, first of all, it's not common when you're talking about sensitive topics to ask people to identify themselves, because it does make people uncomfortable. Even if they don't fill in their contact information, it makes them feel like they're more likely to be identified, or the survey's not anonymous. So if you're talking, it depends on what you're surveying people about, but certainly we are not asking people to let us circle back and contact them for clarification. I think the difference between a public opinion survey and something like a legal proceeding in which is that we're not interested in necessarily validating that people's experiences that their perceptions are accurate, right? It is by definition an opinion survey. So people could be completely full of it, but we're getting their opinion, but they're only one of many people that are going to be contributing. So do you see what I mean? So we're not going to be like, this is not going to impact someone's personnel records, in which case we would need to verify what they're saying.
We've been tasked with this from the state, right? Who knows how much further this is going to go? I don't know, your opinion is that with a sensitive issue, maybe people, they feel they don't want to put their information down. That's your opinion, right? But if we're allowing people the option to put pen to paper to elaborate on the responses, I don't know why we can't also provide them the option to put their name. And if they choose to, they choose to. If not, they choose not to. I don't know why we would just, I don't know why, if other surveys have had it, why we take it to just remove it.
You're suggesting that we allow them to have the opportunity of being anonymous if they choose to, but if they don't choose to, they can put their name.
Absolutely.
Why would we want to know their name? I'm wondering.
Well, I think it helps,
Follow up.
I think it helps solidify more the sample. I think it allows you to gauge, their responses a little bit better. It also is gonna, if they put their name in and there is ever some follow-up, who knows if the state is gonna want to have a focus group later on with certain members of the community or certain members of the whole county. If we have the ability in any survey, and I worked in the data collection field, to validate it, it is going to lower your percent of error in regards to the survey.
Well, it's not my opinion that it would make people uncomfortable. It's just what the research shows is that it makes people.
What research is that, Kathy? Because I don't understand if there's been other surveys throughout the county that hold that option. What's the big deal if we just put that option in? If they choose to exercise it, they choose. If not,
You know what, I'm sorry, John. I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead, please. No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, that's pretty much it.
I think we can, if you're aware of information that's different from what I'm aware of, I'm happy to go back and look through the research that, I haven't done survey research in about 10 years, so maybe there's new information on anonymity. But personally, my personal experience from like collecting medical and clinical trial data is that, and going through HIPAA training and all that stuff, which and human subjects ethics, is that it's really when you're offering people confidentiality, you need to have safeguards in place that would make it nearly absolutely impossible for them to be identified. And then I think it's complicated to then tell people, well, actually you can be confidential or not. What's your choice? And so I think personally getting people to be candid takes priority. That's my personal feeling, takes priority over whether in the future, the state might want to do a focus group and use our people from Irvington. But that's my personal feeling, is that getting people to be candid is the highest priority because we put a lot of effort into this. We want good data out.
Sure, of course.
Yeah, Kathy, is it possible to add something that says that if you are open to being contacted in the future, then you could put your name in? Does that sort of solve both issues?
I think it could, or we can actually go through another process where, for instance, maybe Brian in his newsletter could say, hey, we're like interested in, as another wave of this, after the survey's done, we're interested in having people come forward who might want to participate in a small group setting and are willing to be identified. But I would do that personally. I would do that as like well after the survey were closed. But I'm happy to explore it. I don't mean to be dogmatic about this. It's just that, all my training kind of struggles against compromising people's sense of confidentiality. But I don't want to dominate the decision because it's the group's decision. So.
That's what I was going to suggest, that I think that they're both very valid points, and maybe we should just open it to the group to determine, so what we'll do is we'll come up, once everything is completed, we can just simply do an offline survey of the group to determine which way you want to go, and then we can move forward that way.
I have a question regarding the use of the survey and the analysis of the survey. And that goes to what, I guess, the issue that John's raising, and how much, I think, John, your point is, how do we know how to weigh the responses? I think Donnie's suggestion is actually a good one that is a meeting point, but moving forward, so we get all these responses back, and we've got hundreds of responses back, and I'm sure every single high school kid's going to send it back. So I don't even know what that number is going to be, 9th through 12th grade, and the teachers and employers, employees, and residents. So now, we've got 30 of us, or however many are on this committee. What are we doing with this information? I mean, how are we analyzing it, and how are we using it to the ends that this committee was set up to achieve? And when I initially raised the suggestion of the survey in our very first meeting, I did so because I got the sense that there seemed to be I don't know if negative is the right word for it, but we were approaching this from a negative standpoint, that there are issues within the police department. And as somebody who's been, I've made it clear, is satisfied with the police department, I just wasn't sure, I was thinking, let's ask people what they think first. And if the general consensus in the community is that people are satisfied, then we'll narrow our focus on the issues, I guess, with which are not. But again, we're going to have hundreds and hundreds of surveys. And how are we going to process these and come up with a use for them?
So
I
the
think
way
that's a
we'll do it
great question, Lori. I think that the goal is it's not an exercise where we're going to have answers per se, where we're going to say that it's a good department or a bad department. It's really to give the department, in my estimation, and of course, Kathy, value your input, but as far as I can see, it's an opportunity for the department to see how it's perceived, with an understanding that you're going to get some people who just fill it out and it's not even what they believe. Somebody's just going to say it's terrible no matter what. They've never had an interaction. Somebody else is going to say it's 100% great. They've never had an interaction. So it's an opportunity for us to just have a general idea of what's out there. So if we get a lot of people saying, hey, we'd like to have more outreach, we'd like to have more non-enforcement engagement with the department. We'd like to have events where you come by just to come by, not as a police officer. It's something to consider. If they think that they want us to focus more in a particular area, someone may say this park is a problem. Maybe nobody knows that park's a problem. I mean, I'm driving the other day and I saw where everybody lines up before they get on the Springbrook Parkway and race, because they were all in this automotive dealership. And I looked and I saw the cars and I said, well, these cars are all like the Fast and the Furious. This must be where they meet. So I stumbled upon that. I don't think you would necessarily know that. So somebody might be able to tell us that. We may get enforcement benefit just from the survey, but it's not going to be a situation where we have quote unquote data that we're looking to say is necessarily accurate. But it will give us an opportunity to just have a gauge. And what I found when we did similar things for public sessions with the county, I mean, certainly, yeah, you had some people who called in and you knew that they were going to be complaining about the police, and you had other people who were going to call in and you knew that they were going to say the police never do anything wrong. And then most people were more in the middle of asking questions to get information or saying what they'd like to see. So we really.
My question is for this committee and for the purposes of producing a product by April, whatever date it is, in April, how are we going to process the surveys? I understand that from the police department standpoint, they'll have all the time in the world to read through them and say, wow, I didn't know that. This is great information. That's great. And I think that's very helpful for the police department. But again, we're going to get a giant stack of surveys. And so for purposes of this group, I'm wondering if it's something that we need subcommittees to, we break them up, everybody gets, 100 of them to go through, and how does that work?
I think,
So,
Kathy, I'll
Lori,
give you a
one of the
second
things-
to a minute to
can I
respond,
address-
because then we have Marcus here. So we're going to have roughly a half hour or so with Mark. But please,
Let
if
me
you
just
can,
answer
Kathy,
in
go
1
ahead.
second now. So Lori,
Sure.
thank you for your excellent comments, by the way, that you emailed me. The vast majority of the surveys submitted are going to be done online. And so they're going to be already in a spreadsheet. And I will generate a report based on that. And if people want sub-analyses, and the report will break down responses by whether they're students, employers, employees, residents, adult residents, or visitors. And then based upon that, if people want more sub-analyses, I will make them available. The part that will be labor intensive is analyzing the open-ended answers. And maybe what we'll do is we'll just, we'll code those and we'll just kind of tabulate them, or we'll have to talk about that as a second step. But most of it will be, I would say, less than a few days on my part.
The open-ended will probably be most valuable.
Yeah, probably. That's why we have to figure out what to do to preserve anonymity, but also make those responses available to everyone. So.
Beautiful. Thank you very much.
Just one last thing, Kathy, when you contact the school district, make sure it's for the entire staff, because there's some that are not only in one school. Make sure it's the entire staff, the central office, the monitors, everybody.
Thank you, John. Okay. Any other questions before we move on?
I just think that the fact that there's this much back and forth in regards to this is probably a good idea for us to just use the same survey that Tarrytown and Ardsley used. So it would simplify a lot of things, would be a great starting point. And further down the line, we could tailor other surveys to do this. But the fact that there's this much push and pull on this issue is it's inefficient. I just want to say that. I also think that if we expect the vast majority of these surveys to be received digitally, we have a very large senior citizen community in Irvington. And I believe that if you expect a lot of senior citizens who make up a very large percentage of our community to be able to go on a SurveyMonkey using a digital PCR code and then take a survey, it's not going to happen.
So those people can request a paper survey. It'll say right on the postcard, call this number to request a paper survey, and it'll go to your house with an envelope.
We may want to, well, we can talk about that. I think that Scott, that's a good point, and maybe we can talk about ways to interface with the seniors, with community, and maybe we can approach them, give them the option at least.
Right, like Joe Orchino, or someone who is in close contact with all of the seniors, needs to make a concerted effort to give them physical paper copies of this survey, and that needs to be, taken seriously. If you think the vast majority is going to be digital, that's not the case.
Okay, so what I'm going to propose we do right now is we have our guest speaker who's present, and we're very fortunate to have Mark Giuliano. Mark, how are you? Hope all is well. And thank you for joining us. We look forward to your presentation. And Mark, please give us your exact title, because I am the worst at that. I will have you running things that may not even exist.
And I don't want to run anything more than. So I'm a program coordinator with Westchester County Department of Community Mental Health. I work very specifically in adult mental health services.
Thank you. So Mark, one of the things we wanted to talk to you about, because we're discussing the possibility of having shared services as it relates to dealing with people with mental health issues. Mm-hmm. And maybe we can discuss a little bit about what you've been doing, just the history of it, and
Sure.
Looking at what that might look like with Irvington, possibly in partnership with its neighboring communities, and to what degree we may be able to also use Department of Community Mental Health to address mental health issues before they become of such a nature that the police need to be involved in the first place.
Okay. So I will say that as far as working with people who might be experiencing crisis because of an exacerbation of a mental health concern, or even substance use issue, or sometimes developmental disability, I've been the primary person who's provided training for law enforcement since over the past 20 years at the Westchester County Police Training Academy. I've also been the primary CIT coordinator for the Hudson Valley region, most specifically Westchester County, for probably it's got to be coming on the past 15 years now. I came into the whole CIT world because back in 2006, New York State Division of Criminal Justice Services was beginning to roll out a curriculum that was based off of Rochester Police Department's emotionally disturbed persons response team. And when they had their session that was held over in Rockland County, over at the Rockland County Fire Center, Don Kamen, who is one of my counterparts out in Western New York, was on vacation. So I was fortunate to be asked to join their training team to deliver the mental health aspects of the program. I was so taken by the quality of the presentations and what they were trying to accomplish. I wanted to make sure that we were going to deliver CIT or EDPRT training, is what it was called at the time, or CIT training every year since then. And we initially began to invite the training team from Monroe County down to Westchester every year. And then I realized after a short period of time, it didn't make sense to have the training team from Rochester or Monroe County can't come in. It made more sense to begin to replace it with people who are local people and local champions. I wanted the officers who are coming into the class to be able to have a discussion with the psychiatrists that they were likely to meet in the emergency department. I wanted them to be able to begin to build those relationships. And that's really what the whole concept of CIT is about, is developing those relationships right across the board with not only between law enforcement and the mental health community or the substance use community, but also people with lived experience and their families, creating this partnership between all of those entities. In Westchester, we began to adapt. We began to deliver CIT training, the full 40-hour CIT training at the Recruit Academy, though our recruits are not CIT officers. Our recruits come out with enhanced mental health training. In fact, the minimum standard for training in the state of New York is 21 hours. Police officer has to have 21 hours of how to deal with a person who might be experiencing an emotional crisis. That crisis, once again, could be precipitated by a mental health concern, by use of alcohol or substance. It could be because of a medical condition. It could be just from situational stress. New York State requires 21 hours, and we've been delivering 40 hours probably for the past 5 years. But recognizing that there were some pieces of the puzzle that we needed to focus on with the recruits that didn't make them true CIT officers. When we bring people back in, and I know based on my training records, there have been 4 or 5 officers through from the Irvington Police Department, and Chief Cerrone has been a big proponent of this. We have had some of the experienced officers come in through the training, and that is a different level than we're giving. We have to make sure, to be frank, we have to make sure that the recruits understand about documentation liability, how to enter a room safely without getting themselves hurt. We don't need to focus on those things quite as in depth in the experienced officer class. What we want to focus on with the experienced officer class is making those connections with the community-based providers. When you've got somebody who's coming out as a recruit, the likelihood that they're going to remember the person that's running the assertive community treatment team or the person who's a clinician on the mobile crisis team it's really pretty diminished. But if you've got an experienced officer who's been out on the street and knows the challenges that they experience at 4 o'clock in the morning, they're more likely to say, okay, that's a physician that I know is going to be a reliable resource, or somebody who I can reach out to when it turns out that I am experiencing some level of crisis. So there's a little bit of a tweak in the training. So there is a difference between the recruit class and the experienced officer class, but that is what we have been doing. Our office also provides, we've got staff embedded in some of the police departments throughout Westchester County. Obviously, we don't have a staff person embedded in Irvington, but we do have resources for you. We have a social worker embedded in the White Plains Police Department. We have a CASAC embedded in the Yonkers Police Department 4th Precinct. We have a licensed mental health counselor embedded in the New Rochelle Police Department. And while we can't dedicate a resource, a full-time person to every police department, we do have a jail diversion grant through the Bureau of Justice Assistance, where we have one of our partner agencies, it's People USA. They actually sit in our office, and the People USA staff, well, Irvington falls into their catchment area. So they're prepared to take any referrals. We've worked very well with other police departments in regards to this, and I'll give you an example in how we work with Mamaroneck. If it turns out that the Mamaroneck Police Department comes in contact with somebody who's experiencing emotional crisis, they may call me up at the point that they are engaging the person, or they may simply engage the person, de-escalate the situation, and then forward me a copy of the report knowing that the person is going to need some further follow-up services. I take the report from Sergeant Ballantyne, I pass it on over to the crisis stabilization team. The crisis stabilization team then reaches out to the person in the community so that we can lessen the likelihood that they're going to go into crisis again. We could teach and put out information about de-escalation, and I think it's absolutely valuable information. But if the only thing that we do is teach people how to, law enforcement, how to de-escalate people in crisis, then they're going to keep going out and doing the same thing over and over. But if it turns out that we can take that person who is in a state of crisis and get them connected to a constellation of services that are meaningful to them, then it lessens the likelihood that a law enforcement professional is going to have to engage with that person. And the person's going to have an increased likelihood of being able to engage in services that are meaningful for them. And that's really what we're shooting for with that. So once again, People USA is the entity who's been reaching out within the community. And I believe Lindsay Rivera very specifically is the worker in the area that would be a resource to Irvington to help reach out to people who might be in a state of crisis. We have also in the beginning of People USA is a subcontractor for the Department of Community Mental Health. And with People USA, they literally sit in the office space that I'm seated. So it's seamless. We have shared space with them, so that way we can ensure that things are going to happen quickly. And we also ensure the quality of the services that they're delivering. In addition to that, in the beginning of the COVID health crisis, we had some inquiries from the Westchester County Police Chiefs Association because they were concerned that they wanted to try to avoid having officers come into the hospitals because they were hotbeds of COVID. They didn't want the officers to be exposed. They also didn't want the person who's in a state of crisis coming into a hospital if it turned out that they didn't need to be there. So we set up a virtual assessment program where we have, once again, we have clinicians and peers available to every police department in Westchester County. So that way, if they've got a person who's experiencing a crisis in the community, the person doesn't meet the criteria. Well, there's question as to whether the person really needs to be in the hospital or not. We want to be able to pick up the ball and make sure that the person gets connected with services. And that's actually worked quite well throughout the entire pandemic. We've got, it's a combination between our office, People USA, and the St. Vincent's Crisis Prevention Response Team. Each of those entities has taken a couple of police departments, and we're on call basically from 7 o'clock in the morning until 10 o'clock at night. Not to say that crisis doesn't happen after that, not to say that my phone doesn't ring at that time after that as well. But we've been on call to try and provide support to the officers on the scene and provide support to the individual who's experiencing crisis so we can make sure that services are put in place with them. So those are some of the things that we've been doing within our department. I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any, without putting up a formal PowerPoint presentation and going in through all of that. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer them.
I have a question. You may have covered this already. So if a police officer is in a situation, can he make telephone contact with a counselor for advice?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And sometimes and once again, I believe it's Lindsay Rivera who's assigned to Irvington, not only through the crisis stabilization team, but within the virtual assessment program. And if it turned out that Lindsay was unavailable, the next name on the list would be Tony Alagbemi. That's her supervisor. And ultimately, if neither of them are available for whatever reason, ultimately it goes to my cell phone.
So Chief Cerrone, do all of the Irvington police officers have the phone numbers for these people?
No, the numbers are kept at the desk area because the desk sergeant will be doing the dispatching, and if he needs to contact them immediately, he can directly do it from the desk without having to have the officer have the number. And it's going to be more of a tactical challenge for the officer to try to do it on scene when he needs to be focused on speaking with or trying to de-escalate the situation. So that's where the desk officer would reach out towards Mark's people.
Other questions?
Yes, one question. Do you foresee this service being provided past the end of COVID?
Yes, actually, I know that the crisis stabilization team is not something that's dependent on COVID, though we probably, it's likely that we're going to ramp up even further over the next few months because there are some very specific FEMA funds that have become available because of the COVID health crisis. And one of the ways we look to do that, to use some of that money, was to support people in crisis in the community through the contacts with law enforcement. We recognize that it's not just people who have serious mental health concerns that are experiencing crisis at this point. It's people who can't figure out how they're going to pay their mortgage, how they're going to provide for their family. And it's really, their lives have become really critical. And we want to make sure that we have somebody who's going to be responsive to the needs of people within the community, but also to the needs of law enforcement that may be on the scene responding to that person and that family.
Yeah, and I'll add to that too. Chief Dave Ryven and myself and the Westchester Chiefs Association are looking to expand this program. We do find that it's very helpful in times of crisis to get somebody there quickly versus the old days of waiting for a team. As Mark can testify to, in the old days, you sometimes had to wait an hour or two, sometimes even longer. This is instantaneously. And like I say, Dave Ryan has been a big advocate for this along with the Chiefs Association.
Yep. And in the old days, it all depended on who picked up the telephone at the crisis team. And I'm not talking about the crisis prevention response team that's run out of St. Vincent's at this point. But at one point, Westchester Medical Center held the contract for the Westchester crisis team. They gave that up about 5 years ago. But it all depended on who was dependent on the personality of the person who picked up the phone that was on call that night. There's another piece of the puzzle that two other pieces of the puzzle that we're exploring. We're not quite there yet, but they're sort of coming attractions of where we would like to go. We recognize that every call that comes into 911 doesn't necessarily require an EMS and law enforcement response. There are some calls that come into 911 that are people that just need somebody to talk to. They're lower risk calls. We're trying to develop a protocol to see how we might be able to divert some of those. It'll be a small percentage of calls because we don't want to be in a situation where we've got some doubt about what's happening in the situation within that person's life. But if we can get the person who just needs somebody to talk to over to a warm line or a hotline, we would rather have a mental health response to that individual than to have law enforcement and EMS involved. When it turns out that EMS has to be involved, we've begun to look at some of the models throughout the United States, including the CAHOOTS model, which is out of Oregon, but more locally, the BERT model, the Behavioral Health Response Team, which is a Rockland County program, where they have co-located a clinician into EMS. So their EMS becomes their crisis team with a clinician involved. So these are some of the programs that we're looking towards. Not to say that that either one of them is going to be a be-all, end-all, but we'd like to take a look to see how we might be able to make our crisis response system best serve the people within Westchester.
And if I missed this, please forgive me, but do you envision the possibility of having a shared services model where, let's say, we have the river towns come together where they have a crisis intervention team similar to a SWAT team, where there is also a designee perhaps from your office that may be able to be on call to work with them?
Sure. Yeah, and it's interesting because I believe the telephone call is set up early next week. It's not a call like we have right now. It's a much more intimate call with Hastings Police Department. They're interested in seeing what they may be able to do. So within the river towns, you probably are going to have a cohort of officers, if you don't already have a cohort of officers who are trained to intervene in the lives of people who are in crisis. You may be able to provide mutual aid. There's also been some discussion of doing that more on a countywide level, just as not every police department has aviation or a scuba team. We have talked a bit about that with the Westchester County Department of Public Safety, seeing how we might be able to finesse things with a crisis intervention team that could act as a resource to some of the local municipalities as well. So there are a number of different options that we're exploring as we're trying to move forward within this.
And I just wanted to also follow up with respect to training, because we're looking at, or considering at least, more in-service training as it relates to mental health, interacting with people with mental health crises. Do you foresee a possibility of us sharing services with other municipalities where, let's say, maybe we come in with 3 or 4 other, maybe more, maybe it's all of the river towns for joint training sessions, or maybe with even larger, maybe we get countywide training sessions on an annual basis?
Yep. We, Detective Barber and I from County PD have been, we've got a longer training record together than either of us have been able to hold together our marriages. We both have been training together for about 20 years. And
we're going to strike that from the record.
yeah, please. But what I will say is that when we've delivered this training, Rob and I have delivered not only the full CIT training, but we've delivered some in-service training during the unified in-service training that the county offers during the summer. He and I have gone out and done very specific trainings for some of the local police departments. I offered a CIT directly to the New Rochelle Police Department at one point, specific to what was going on within their community, with getting to know some of the very specific resources within the New Rochelle community. If we wanted to tailor something that would create a mutual aid CIT team within the river towns, we can draw in the very specific mental health providers to act as part of our community resource. It doesn't make as much sense for an officer from Irvington, for example, to know about the services that are being offered in Mount Vernon. And sometimes that's what happens in the broader CIT training. If we wanted to do something locally, tailored to the river towns, we certainly could do that. We'd be happy to.
Now, in your personal opinion, no, not holding you to anything, in a 3-year period, how many hours of training should every non-rookie officer get?
In a 3-year period. I think that the first thing I have to discern is not necessarily all officers. I want to speak specifically to CIT officers. And it's interesting because with every other specialized unit within law enforcement, there are training days dedicated. If you were on ESU, SWAT, scuba, aviation, you're a K-9 officer, you have some level of additional hours of training. Within the CIT community, it's kind of been a one and done. You've got your 40 hours of training, you got your certificate, and now you're able to move forward. And I don't necessarily agree that that's the right way of doing business. I think that there should be refresher trainings. I think there should be advanced classes. I think that if you're not regularly engaging in the mindset of CIT, there's a possibility that it's not going to come naturally and at your fingertips. So I believe that there should be at least 3 days of refresher training per year. That's my personal opinion.
Okay, but what about for the non-CIT officer? I mean, because sometimes they're not on duty.
Right. And it's funny when I have whenever we do offer a CIT class, what I end up seeing is that we have some people who are volunteers. They actually want to be there. They've got some level of passion. Maybe they have a family member who has a mental health concern or a developmental disability, and they want to be there for that reason. And then there are others that are in the class that are simply told to be there, and they're voluntold. And what I always say to my voluntold is that I'm happy you're here as well, because people with mental health concerns and co-occurring disorders and developmental disabilities and people with dementia, they're vulnerable people in the community. And those of you who are here from an enforcement perspective, I need you to be the guardians for those people who are vulnerable in the community. And I do believe that it really should be, I would say 3 days for a dedicated CIT officer of additional training per year. It should be at least a day for a non-CIT officer.
Thank you.
Mark, have you, from your perspective and your experience, have you found that training is also equally helpful in terms of preserving officer safety when they have?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's one of the ways we try to get buy-in right off the bat, because it really is an officer-driven safety, officer safety-driven training as well. My buddy Eric Weaver, he was a sergeant and commanding officer for the Rochester Police Department's emotional and disturbed persons response team, did a little bit of an informal study, and I'm sure some of you have heard me say this before they implemented the EDPRT up in the city of Rochester. And what he found is that in incidents involving the chronically normal, so not people with mental illness, just a rational bad guy, if there is such a thing as a rational bad guy, police use force about 5% of the time, and officers were injured about 5% of the time. So it's about an equal amount of use of force and officer injury. When they looked at those incidents where they had a person who was in a state of emotional crisis, police continue to use force about 5% of the time, which is interesting in and of itself, because you don't have a person who's a rational bad guy. You have a person who is actually experiencing some sort of mental health crisis. Police continue to use force about 5% of the time, but officer injury rates more than doubled. It was about 12% of the time that officers were injured. And it didn't mean that people with mental health concerns were any more dangerous, violent, or scary than the rest of the population. It meant that the tools that law enforcement would default to actually might make the situation worse without training. If I'm a person who's living in a perpetual state of fear, and you use the tactics of intimidation, and let's face it, a lot of police practices are predicated on intimidation. There's a lot of noise, there's a lot of lights, things move quickly, law enforcement goes home safely at the end of the day, and that's kind of the way things work. And if it turns out that I'm living in a perpetual state of fear, and you approach me from that perspective, I may actually attack you, not out of malice, but because I'm afraid for my life. When they began to implement the EDPRT program, the incidence of officer injury went from 12% to 0%, simply by defaulting to a different skill set and approaching people in crisis in a different way.
I have a question for the police department. Is it possible that somebody with the intensive training is on every shift?
Right now, that's probably not possible, just based on the number of officers we have trained in it. But I mean, that's definitely something that we could work towards, to have more of the department trained, so that, that there's a good chance that at any time there'd be one or two or multiple officers that have CIT training on.
That would be great.
And remember, every police officer in the state of New York, with their 21 hours of training that they get through the Recruit Academy in Westchester, knowing that it's actually 40, should have the skill set in order to de-escalate people. But I agree with you. If it turned out that it were my family member that were in a state of crisis, I would want the best trained hands to work with my family member. I would want the people with the most robust skill set, and the people who understood what my family member was going through, to be the people to respond.
And sort of, if we take a step back outside of what's directly law enforcement, but sort of reimagining partnership of law enforcement and, let's say, mental health. And this is for anybody. Do you think it might make sense for us to explore ways that Department of Community Mental Health and or another provider may be able to partner with the department to reach out to people in the community that are suspected or that may be looking for assistance, to make sure that services are provided to people in advance of them having these kinds of interactions with the police.
Yep.
And at that point, perhaps if an officer joins someone from mental health and goes to someone, then a relationship's being established. You have a member or several members of the department who are known to these individuals, and there'll be a comfort level when they see you. They'll know that you're there to assist, and they'll know that there are perhaps other mental health services available through the county or through the village.
And that's exactly what we've been doing with the crisis stabilization team. And I gave the example where Sergeant Ballantyne over in Mamaroneck will send me over a police report. I'll speak to Tony. Tony will send out, either he'll go himself, Lindsay, or one of the other members of the team will go out, sometimes with a CIT trained officer, sometimes on their own, depending on what appears to be the best way of approaching the situation. In addition to the crisis stabilization team has really been focused on the mental health aspects of things. We've been working very closely with Onward Recovery for people who officers had to have revived with a Narcan save. Onward Recovery operates through the Independent Living Center, but they've been focusing on people who are struggling with substance use disorders, and some of their peer specialists have been doing a really great job of engaging people after that Narcan save. And once again the referrals are coming in the same way. I'm getting a referral in from the PD. I'm reaching out to Sabrina Johnson from Onward Recovery. I'm saying, Sabrina, can you reach out to this person? We want to be able to proactively work with people before they go into that next crisis so that we can get them connected with services.
Beautiful.
Mayor, just add to that, we are mandatory reporters, so anybody that has issues out there, we do make a lot of referrals to mental health and social services for any particular needs that a person may need. And we've done that. I can't count the number of times we've done that.
And Chief, in connection with your role as a mandatory reporter, that does not necessarily require that someone be committed to a facility, does it? Or is it simply that you're going to contact the services as appropriate? So if someone appears to be a threat to themselves or others, then perhaps there's an involuntary commitment for the 72 hours of observation. If not, you may be able to refer for a more an outpatient interaction.
Absolutely, that's correct.
That's outstanding. And again, these are things because we're always looking at ways we can, and we call it transparency, but we're always looking at ways we can inform the public of the services available. And it's always fascinating that there's so many services most people have no idea exist wherever they live. So to the degree we can do that, it could be a real benefit. And I'm thinking in particular for parents, or sometimes for people who are concerned about their parents, to have the ability to make a referral can give them a tremendous amount of peace of mind, and it may prevent a lot of bad interactions that don't need to occur.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Beautiful. Anybody, any additional questions? Or any suggestions? Because we're always, I know Mark is always interested in how we can do it better. And that's the beauty of it, is that it's, if we continue to do that, then we always improve it. We look back and say, hey, we were in a good place, but now we're doing things we had never imagined. And who would ever think that COVID would help us to do some things that probably never would have happened but for COVID? So that will save people's lives down the road. It's something that we wouldn't have even been thinking about.
What about?
I think.
Oh, okay. There's a question that came in the chat box about people who decline to participate in substance use treatment. And it's always a challenge getting people connected to substance use services. And that's one of the things that has been really helpful about Onward Recovery, since it's a recipient, a peer-based organization. There are people who have been there, and they're both the crisis stabilization team and onward recovery use a process called motivational interviewing to try and enhance a person's motivation or desire to begin to make some change within their life. And I was on a telephone call yesterday with the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration, where we're going to be doing a presentation on early interventions within the community. And one of the things I said to the person on the call is that we've begun to integrate some aspects of motivational interviewing into the CIT training, where we're talking about stages of change. We're talking about moving people from pre-contemplation to contemplation. And I said, some of our CIT officers at this point are probably more versed in motivational interviewing than some of the clinicians that are out there in the community. So it could be that officer who helps that person move through those stages of change. It could be it could be a peer or somebody with lived experience who helps that person move through the stages of change. And it's just a matter of being consistent in continuing to try to get the person to begin to do their business a little bit differently. We're not going to be 100% successful 100% of the time, but we can do our best to try to motivate people to do their business differently, so that way they have lives that are fulfilling.
Beautiful. Thank you.
The bottom line recommendation that we've already received is to increase the yearly training for the officers, whether they're CIT or just regular officers. And I think that's a great starting point for us.
And we have a tremendous resource here in the county. So, I mean, we're very fortunate. And when you go a little bit north of where we are, there are a lot of very small counties that don't have a robust county government with a Department of Mental Health that they can turn to. So we're very fortunate. And it's an opportunity for us to partner, I think, and I think both will benefit.
And I think also to send a message to Albany that they need to increase social services throughout the state, and especially in the more populated areas.
Yep.
Like Westchester.
Do any of our police officers have any questions or suggestions? Because it's important. We don't often have an opportunity to have the give and take and to hear your perspectives. I think that's important. So if there are things that you encounter that we don't become aware of, this is an opportunity to share that with Mark in a different type of forum.
Can you just tell us the hours again? Did you say that it's not a 24-hour service? Did you say your office closes at 7?
No, our office closes. We go from 9 to 5, but when it turns out, if it turned out that you had somebody who's in a state of crisis and you needed to get in touch with us, we go from 7 in the morning until 10 o'clock at night. And even still after that, one of the things I didn't tell you, and I appreciate, it looks from my perspective, using my great assessment skills that you're on the law enforcement side of the fence. I run an impaired drivers program, so I appreciate all the DWI offenders that you send my way. If my drunk drivers can call me at 4 o'clock in the morning to find out about their driver's license, you can certainly call me at 4 o'clock in the morning if you've got somebody who's experiencing a state of crisis. So my cell phone is always on, and I get all sorts of strange calls at all hours, and we're always here to help.
But you would agree, you would agree that 10 o'clock at night limit is very limited.
Yes, what happens at 4 o'clock in the afternoon is always different than what happens at 4 o'clock in the morning. But if it turned out that if you were to call me up and say, hey, Mark, I've got this guy, I'm not really sure, he doesn't seem to meet the criteria for 941. He's acting odd. He seems disheveled. We're not really sure what to do with him. I may help you get him connected with some social services support tonight, but tomorrow I would have somebody reaching out to that person. So we might not be able to fix it at 10 o'clock at night, but if you said, I've got John Doe, he's struggling, I'll make sure that John Doe has an outreach that next day from one of the people from the crisis stabilization team.
You think it would be beneficial? So you're just talking in terms of crisis stabilization, but for crisis intervention, it would be available 24/7.
Well, the crisis intervention trained officers are there 24/7, but that's not what we're talking. I don't think that's what John is talking about. He's saying, if I've got somebody who's in crisis at 10 o'clock at night, what you're going to be able to provide me is going to be different than I would get at 10 o'clock in the morning. And I absolutely agree with you 100%. That's just.
Well, now, one of the things to that point, if we were to establish a model as we're considering, let's say where we have a hub throughout the county, each region has a hub that can respond, seamlessly. The objective would be to be able to have somebody who is a mental health professional be able to arrive and work with our officers. And if that's at 3 a.m, they're going to be on call and be able to be there. And for instance, as a former prosecutor, if I had homicide duty, I was on call, I was available to be there, and I had to be able to get there. And for me, of course, I didn't have to be there immediately, but I did have to get there fairly closely to that. So the goal would be to give the tools to our officers to know that if there's something that they're training that goes beyond their ability, where we need, or not say beyond their ability, where we could benefit from the use of someone who has specialized skills in dealing with mental health crisis, that we'd be able to have a team of officers and mental health professionals that would be able to arrive 24 hours a day, so that we can't say, hey, you know what, it's too bad it's Saturday and it's 11 o'clock. And I think it's to John's point, hey, look, from 11 to whenever, when people are out doing what they do, is probably when you're likely to get a lot of this stuff. We want to make sure that people are available to be there, because it's, in my estimation, would be difficult for us to tell the taxpayers that it was after a certain hour, and that's why we didn't have it available.
So how
that's
can
sort
we
of what we're looking
advocate for this?
And I'm glad that you asked that question, because somebody said before we should be advocating to say that we should have more social services.
Yes.
It looks, it's not a really good look when we on the Department of Mental Health side of the fence turn around and say, Albany, we need more money for the Department of Mental Health. But if it turns out that our partners within the community, whether it be families, whether it be people with lived experience, whether it be law enforcement, turn to Albany and say, we really need a more robust crisis system, we're far more likely to end up with the outcome that we're looking for.
And toward that end, if we have a recommendation through our body that says we want this, and the other river towns and other communities in Westchester do, and maybe we get a bunch more throughout the state, then there's a great chance it'll happen as a state recommendation.
Yeah,
We can also make the recommendation to the county, but Mark, obviously, you're right. It'll be a little different for Mark to say to the county, I need, because it comes across as I need instead of us.
I think this is an
recognizing
excellent suggestion. I think that this is really in line with the reviewing the policies and seeing how we can do better. I think that this would be a great thing for us to focus on doing, advocating for additional training for the police and resources for them.
And Mark, we may ask you to come back just as we get closer. We may want to make sure that we get, as we try to, assuming we move forward with some sort of recommendation in this arena, we may want to talk to you about what that should look like, and we can kind of collaborate on what points need to be included, because as you make recommendations, if it's not included, we don't know that it's going to actually happen. So beautiful. Any other questions? Okay.
No, but I think that this is a great way to decrease violence.
I love his statistic. Every time I hear you give it, Mark, I love it that, you look at the reduction in injuries is tremendous.
Yeah.
And we're talking about investing in training. We invest in all kinds of things. And sometimes what we invest in, you look and try to figure out where the benefit is, and you're hard pressed to find it. But this is one to me that's pretty crystal clear, where I don't see a loser here.
Yeah. In addition to that, if you think about it from this perspective, if you've got, by the time an officer hits the streets and has spent a little bit of time on the street, that police department has invested thousands of dollars into their training, thousands. When you begin to take a look at if that officer goes out with an injury, how much the municipality, how much the department loses with the investment that they've already made in that officer.
Mm-hmm.
If we can tweak the skill set so that officer isn't injured, we reduce the risk of injury to the officer, we reduce the risk of injury to the person in the community, it saves everyone.
Thank you very much.
I wanted to thank you so much too, and I know that we're past that 4 o'clock hour. I'm obviously a lay person here, but I just want to make sure that I'm understanding completely what you're saying. So if after 10 o'clock, before 10 o'clock and 9 o'clock or 7 o'clock in the morning, I forget what time you said, but if an officer is dealing anywhere in the county is dealing with a very complicated, emotionally disturbed person and needs guidance, other than you being, out of the kindness of your heart, being available to answer and people having your cell phone number, there aren't any resources in the county?
We have the St. Vincent's Crisis Stabilization or Crisis Prevention Response Team, not Crisis Stabilization Team. The Crisis Prevention Response Team operates from 8 o'clock in the morning until 10 o'clock at night, similar to the hours that we were talking about before. But then they have a nurse available who's going to answer the telephone from 10 o'clock in the morning until 8 o'clock in the morning. That's the other resource that's out there. They're not going to make a mobile visit. They will only provide some level of support to that officer who's made the telephone call to them. So that's one of the other resources that's out there in the community. We're trying to work to the best of our ability in partnership with the St. Vincent's team to make sure that we're not stepping over each other. We want to make sure that we're doing our best to meet the needs of the people in Westchester across the board. We've got a very large geographic county, but also a large, very diverse population. And there's more than enough work to go around. We'll just put it that way.
Just to add to that, I want to make it clear that there are some services, as Mark had said, out there. Under the mental health law, we can take the person into custody, which isn't a major problem at times, but the problem that we do have is finding a bed or a place to bring them. Yep. And usually at that hour, it's very difficult to find resources. We either use St. Vincent's, Phelps, or St. Joseph and Yonkers. And here's the catch-all. You can't bring them there if they're intoxicated. The other issue is you have to bring them to the medical center. They have to be basically reviewed there before they can go on to a psych center. So that creates more of an issue and more time consuming. So there are issues that you have to, literally juggle. But after 10 o'clock, it gets a little scarce, gets a little scary, but we can manage and we have been managing. I don't want to say that we're just dropping the ball after 10 o'clock. No, that's not the case. I want to clarify that.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Mark. This was really very informative.
Thank you,
Did
Mark.
we answer the last question in the chat about people who declined treatment? I think we did, but I just want to make sure. Okay. Thank you.
But he didn't answer, is there anything written that lays all of this out?
The possibilities for improvement. I would be happy to give you the PowerPoint presentation that kind of details. I don't know that we have a full, let me talk to the commissioner to see if he has something, because we have been looking at, one of the county executive's priorities when he came in was to begin to look at developing crisis stabilization centers throughout the county. There should be something written somewhere. I don't know off the top of my head, but I'll see what I can get you.
Well, generally under the mental health law, that has a lot of gives us a lot of authority of what to deal with mental health. So I would look there too if you want some more.
Yep.
Beautiful.
Thank you all very much. And I don't know if anyone else has any other questions. Our next meeting actually now group 2, it has the more favored date of Monday in the evening from 5 to 7. So the next meeting will be of group 2 and the topic is community engagement. And then group 1 will meet on Wednesday from 2 to 4. I had put on the Google group an outline of the issues raised in the governor's original report of issues to be considered for community engagement, but Mayo and I can speak to see if there's anything more specifically or targeted for Irvington that we might want to make sure we cover on Monday. So, and Monday is a holiday, so I want to thank you all also for making the time, but because time was of the essence, we did include something from Monday evening. So thank you all who can participate, realizing that it's a holiday.
Thank you very much. Truly appreciate it. And well, Mark, I want to thank you. And we have just a few housekeeping things, but we don't need to hold you for that.
Okay.
But thanks again for your willingness and for a phenomenal presentation as always. Truly appreciate you.
Yes.
Happy to help, and let me know if I can be of help for moving forward.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mark.
All the best.
Thank you.
So the other item that we wanted to discuss was scheduling for us to have the meeting with Project Able. And we're going to try to do that. We have it scheduled, and I believe we've locked in the time from 3 to 5 on the 22nd. And that's Larry? Is that what we have, correct?
Yes, Friday, the 22nd, 3 to 5, and I'll set up the meeting and all that.
Beautiful.
You can, as long as you pass it on to your contact there.
They're confirmed. We're confirmed, and I think you'll find it to be a great presentation. And I think that there are a lot of really great things that we're able to do going forward. So, it's been a tremendous success from what I can see for both the community and for law enforcement. Yonkers has actually just signed on to take it, and it came out of New Orleans. So we will hopefully have a presentation from my friend Jonathan Aroney, who's outstanding, and we'll be able to talk about the successes. It stems from EPIC, which is currently being utilized in the police academy, but it expands beyond that, and there's a focus on community as well as officer wellness. So hopefully it's something that will be a very meaningful presentation. So does anyone have anything else that they'd like to raise or anything that we should be discussing prior to our next meeting?
The only thing that I was going to do, in case we needed to make up a little time while Mark joined the meeting, is I was going to put up the mission statement and values, but I don't think I'm going to do that given the time. What I'll do is I'll send around. I mean, anyone can go in and look at it in the shared drive. I'll send around an attachment so you can look at it very quickly. It's obviously very short, which was the goal of the subgroup that worked together. So, but I'll send that around.
Thank you very much. And Maria, what time is the meeting on Monday again? I forgot.
5 o'clock.
Thank you very much. All right. Thank you, everyone. And Larry, thank you very much. I hope everyone is well, and hopefully the balance of this week is great for you and your families, and everyone is healthy. And we'll speak with you soon. And by the way, in the meantime, if anything comes up, if you see anything that you think we should be considering or discussing, even if it's not on the agenda, please make a note of it and share it with us before we conclude with our next meetings.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Stay safe, everybody.
Thank you.